Hello, so today I would like to go through some different ways that I provided some independent worksheets for students as we're working through the Math Essential Element 4OA3, which is solving one-step real-world problems using addition and subtraction. So I just kind of wanted to go through and show you how I rewrote a math word problem that I found in a workbook in one of our curriculum's workbooks. And I did that using this icon right up here. You can see over here you can go right in and it provides a box for you when you click on this little text with a face. It provides you a writing box, right? And you can delete it, move it around, whatever you need to do. But this is how I wrote each of those boxes. And you can see when you go to it, you can then write in whatever you want, and as you write up a word, an icon will appear with it to support your students, right? So it's the way that we provide some adapted text for our students, and I like to write out my math word problems with some icons for our students who are alternately assessed to support them in the reading, right? So that they're not completely focused on decoding the words, but they're actually looking for the math terms that we're looking for. So this is what I like to do, and I can provide this to my students when I'm working in the digital classroom. I can share my screen and have them go through and be able to take turns and read it, and everyone has more access to it this way because the icons there are there to support them. So I wrote out this word problem. Like I said, I pulled out a word problem from one of our math curriculum books and I just typed it out. So what I also did was I color coded it. So I added some borders to it and I color coded it for our students to be able to pull out the different variables and to identify the question in the problem. You can very simply add borders to the sentences by going right up here to the border box and making them as big or as little as you want, right? And then something else you can do is you don't have to fill in the entire box. You can just make it a border, right? So you would just go to this border button, click on it, and pick any color that would be appropriate that you would then be using for your worksheets, right? To be able to cue your students into what it is you are wanting to ask them and what information you're looking for. So this was our word problem that I then created all of my independent worksheets on, and this can be done in groups with your students. This can be done for independent work. This can also be done as homework, right? So you can send this home and then you know that you've provided enough support for your students to be able to pull out that information from a word problem. So this is my early learner level, and you can see what I did here was I used a lot of color coding and icons. So what I did specifically for each question was I tried to color code the correct answer to the question. So oftentimes our students might need a starting point, and this would be a great starting point for them. So they start cueing into, okay, what am I looking for here? I'm looking for this, right? So they start to align what the question is to what the answer is. And so I use that for my supports here, and I also have the actual numbers like written out and what we're talking about because we're talking about students. Have an open-ended question, which is also something you can do if you want your students to type in the answer, or if you want them to write in the answer, they can definitely do that, or they can verbalize the answer to you. So how many students are all together? Again, that would be from our word problem here. So we identified each of our problems, or each of our variables, I'm sorry. We identified each of our variables, we identified our problem, and then we moved through and then I asked all those questions again to make sure that they're comprehending it. I asked another question in here for my early learner levels. So I asked them, what are the two classes we're talking about? Like, what are we even talking about here? Make sure that they are coming back to the text and they're able to give me the information that I'm asking them for, right? So what are the two classes they're going to? We're talking about different classes students attend. So it's Spanish and PE. As we move along, I want to make sure that I address with my students the operation we're going to be using and how do we know that we're going to be using that operation. So we know that a key word for addition is all together. So I want to hone in on that particular word because that's a vocabulary word that tells us what operation we're using. So right above all together, I made sure I added the plus sign so that my students again could identify what the correct answer is. I can go so far as to then make this entire box blue. I can make the border blue. So those are some options, right, that you have. You can make the entire box that way. You can leave it open. You can put a border around it to cue them in. So whatever supports you think your students need, you have a plethora of them to choose from, and you can make sure that you can provide some ways for them to respond independently, and that's the beauty of this. So then over here I have my equation written out for my students. And as a class, we can go through it. 6 plus 3 equals, and then I leave my answer open, right? But I also added the icons down here for my students to be able to count, right? So I want to provide them that support so they can actually be able to go through and count out the actual students that are there. So that is my early learner level for alternately assessed. And then we're going to move on to a C level. I just identified them that way so that I was able to pull them up. But then you can see here, I pulled some of that support. I didn't give them all the visual supports that they were requiring. I still color coded it into the word problems that they had, but what I did instead was I left this open and I provided the label for them. So that's another way that you can increase some rigor for your students, but still provide them the visual supports that they need. So I went through too and I wanted to remind them, okay, what is the problem? What are we looking for when we're solving this word problem? What is it exactly? So I want them to go back and tell me, how many students does Mr. William have in all, right? Again, I moved down to our vocabulary word all together, but I didn't provide those icons for them. I left it open-ended. I need to add, I need to subtract, whatever it is. Then I wrote out again the actual equation that they're going to solve, and I still decided for this level I wanted to provide them some of that grouping support for them to be able to count their icons, right? I also provided some different sentence starters. There are blank students they can write in, or they may not be able to do that full thing, so there are 6 students in Mr. Williams' class. Another thing you can do after they use their sentence starters, they can write it on their own. They just provided a model for themselves. So that's a really amazing thing that they can do, and that's another way that you can modify and support your students. Now let's go to our highest level learners. You can see that I pulled back on a lot of the supports that are over here, right? And then another thing is, in addition to just having the entire block colored in, you can just highlight that border like we had seen back here, right? If you wanted to fade that visual support even more, you could do that. So here's my open-ended questions. I'm asking them to focus in on that problem. Now I changed this total. All together in total, what does that tell you? What will we be trying to solve? And they don't have their sentence starter over here. I didn't write out the equation for them this time, but I did color code those boxes so that they know that they're going to go back into this information page and they're going to pull those numbers from those boxes. So next, we have write out your problem, right? Write out the answer to your problem. So I didn't give them that sentence starter. I have them go through, solve the equation, and then I want them to write it out. How many students are in Mr. Williams' class? Next, I presented a little challenge question. We've been working on addition, so now I want to work on some repeated multiplication. So what I did was I wrote out a short multiplication problem. I just created it myself. I just thought of something. I worked with groups of 5 because that's something our students usually are pretty familiar with, and they learn early on counting by 5s, counting by 10s, right? So I wanted to work on that. I wrote out this word problem for them. Each computer class has a group of 5. There are 3 students in each computer class. How many all together? So again, you can see how I even decreased the visual supports here by just providing those borders that are over here and then just aligning it to the equations. And then finally asking them to write out the answer to their problem. You can just have them write out the number, you can have them label it, you can write it in a full sentence, whatever you think your students need. But this was just some examples that I wanted to provide you with different ways that you can differentiate various student worksheets, and I hope that the differentiation and the scaffolding would be useful and helpful to you. You know, just because it's in a workbook doesn't mean you have to just provide that to them in that way. You can take that information and then make it your own. So I hope this helped, and I hope you can use it.